Para mag-go signal ka muna, sabihin.
Okay. So good day, everyone. First, I would like to thank you to all of you for your time to participate on our discussion for today. So now let's start our discussion. In this presentation, we will discuss our report entitled Qualifiers. The presentation will divided into four categories, which are the definition and example of qualifiers. The second one, types of qualifiers. Third, example of qualifiers in the syntactic environment. And last is how to use qualifiers. Next. The objective for learnings. The objective of this presentation is to help students in understanding qualifiers and the rules to consider when using qualifiers. Next slide, please. So how do we define qualifiers? Patricia will be discuss the definition of qualifiers. Next, please.
Thank you for that, Ruth. So, what are qualifiers? Qualifiers are words that help modify an adjective or adverb. A qualifier helps further define the degree to which something is done, to specify a specific detail, express doubt, or form the intensity of action. Qualifiers work very similarly to adjectives and adverbs in a sentence. However, they are most often used to express doubt or qualify a statement. Next slide. Okay, so before we proceed to the examples, in layman's term, qualifier is a word or phrase that precedes an adjective or an adverb, either increases or decreases the quality signified by the word it modifies. So we have four types of qualifiers: adjective, qualifiers of time, qualifiers of intensity, and qualifiers of relative intensity. And that will be discussed by the next presenters. The word very, quite, rather, somewhat, more, and the phrases a whole, a lot, a good deal, a great deal, a little kind, a little, kind of, or sort of are most commonly used qualifiers. So, um, note that a qualifier weakens or lessens the impact of a word or a phrase in a sentence. And while intensifier strengthens or emphasizes the importance of a word or phrase in a sentence. So let's proceed to the examples.
Okay, before we proceed to the example, let me add a definition about qualifiers. So when we say qualifiers, it means that is a type of word that is used to add extra meaning to another word. One of the common use of qualifiers is to either enhance or limit the meaning of the following word. So why is it important to use qualifiers? When we using qualifiers, especially in writing, the qualifiers makes our writing more precise and honest, right? So qualifier usage can be quite helpful in a variety of situations, such as when writing to persuade. So you can strengthen an argument by using qualifiers like absolutely, the most, or always. So which shows the audience that you are passionate about and sure of what are you stating. Of course, qualifiers are useful when writing in a detailed manner by using numerous descriptive qualifiers and phrases, such as, for example, he was the most handsome man she'd ever seen. So you can help your reader form an image in their mind, but take note of this. So if you overuse any qualifiers in your writing or in your sentences, it may come off as a little careless, especially if you are trying to impress with your inventive language. So let's proceed to the example of qualifiers. So as you can observe, this example shows how the sentence enhanced by using qualifiers, right? So because of qualifiers are words like very, to, so, quite, and rather, as we know that we qualifiers are the function of part of speech. Next slide. So by the given example, it is modify adjectives or adverbs telling to what degree. So the sole purpose is to qualify or intensify an adjective or adverb. So the word rather in the last sentence is we should call a qualifier. So we use the word rather is to give emphasis to an adjective or adverb of the given sentence. So it has a similar meaning to quite when quite is used with gradable words. It is more formal, right? So when we use quite with a gradable adjective or adverb, it usually means a little, moderately, but not very. It has a similar meaning to rather or fairly. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's proceed to the different types of qualifiers. Next reporter, please.
Okay. So qualifiers may reduce the risk of ambiguity when discussing something difficult to define. So we should be aware of which qualifier type we are using because that will affect which audiences we are referring to. So there are different types of qualifiers in the English language. Next slide po. First is the adjectives. Adjectives are the words that describe the qualities or state of being of a noun, or in a concise manner, these are to qualify a noun and are one of the most common qualifiers you might encounter. So, for example, that is a fluffy cat. So, in this given example, the qualifier here is the word fluffy, and it qualified the word cat. Another example, Lisa wore a full sleeve shirt today. So just like in the first example, the qualifier is the word full sleeve and it qualifies the noun word shirt. So for the next type, next slide po. Another type of qualifier is the qualifiers of time. So this type of qualifiers denotes the frequency of an event or action, such as sometimes, always, occasionally, usually, never, always, and so on and so forth. So these are the qualifiers used to know how often an action or event occurs. Let's say, for example, he is usually talkative. So the qualifier used in this sentence is usually. Another example, you can always ask for help. Again, the qualifier used in the word is always. It shows how often or how frequent they can ask for help. So the last two types of qualifiers going to be discussed by Mr. Apple Mark Nilio.
So the next types of qualifiers, which is the qualifiers of intensity. So these are used to qualify a noun or one of the most common qualifiers you might encounter. So basically, these types of qualifiers are used to a sentence to show how light or heavy the degree or magnitude to a noun or which are functional to both noun or adjective. So I'll just continue. So let me repeat again. So the qualifiers of intensity are used to qualify a noun or one of the most common qualifiers you might encounter. So there's some changes about the example used. So let me repeat again that these are qualifiers are used to a sentence to show how light or heavy the degree or magnitude to a noun um, and it could be functional as well to an adjective. So for example, I'll be giving another example. She is a very pretty woman. So very is the term used and serve as qualifiers of the sentence. So it is important to know how important the qualifier is, especially if we wanted to like narrating a story in a very descriptive manner, because letting the pretty term stand alone without the very, meaning that you're just describing the women in the lowest degree or of being pretty. But since it was added by very, we can have this imagination that the speaker is telling that the woman is more than beautiful to what we think. Next slide. Qualifiers of relative quality. This can be used to show how well a noun fits in description. So the example down below is he is the most intelligent student. So the most intelligent student is the use qualifiers in the sentence is the term most, and it can be function to both with or without a noun. And we usually um, added it to adjective to create a superlative degree. So by comprehending the sentence, um, we can tell that that person or the pronoun is the intelligent of the intelligent of a certain group. And the other example of qualifiers, qualifier example without the use of nouns are the use qualifiers in the sentence, which is the most, and others are least, the least, and at least. That's all for my part. Next reporter, please.
Okay, so let's proceed to the qualifiers in the syntactic environment. Next slide, please. Okay. So the first example is I would rather go to school than going to the computer shop. So as you can see, the syntactic environment is given to the presentation. So I is subject and would is auxiliary, and the qualifier word is the rather. So so if you can see the singular or subject, auxiliary, and verb are underlined, it shows that these words are make and structure complete. So the DO or the direct object is the word school. So let's try to remove the optional sentence. So if we remove the optional, which is the sentence, then going to computer shop, the sentence will become I would rather go to school. So what do you observe to the sentence? So well, the sentence will become a short sentence, but still a sentence. Why? Because even though we remove the words inside the parentheses, still it is a complete thought. So as I said earlier, when using a qualifier, the sentence will be enhanced or limit. Lastly, before we add the qualifiers to the sentence will become this. So I would go to school than going to computer shop. So, but when we added the word rather, which is the qualifier, the sentence will be more precise and understandable. Next slide, please. Okay. As you can see, the simple sentence, which is she is pretty. So the word she, it is when we call a subject. Then the word is, it is the predicate. And last, and the word pretty, it is an adjective. It describes a noun. Who is she? So what do you think if we add qualifiers to the to this sentence? So the first one is she is kind. Okay, sa second pala yun. So the first one is she is very pretty. Meaning the word she is very pretty, if we added a qualifier, the meaning of the sentence will give different meaning, or it will increase the sentence because of the word very. Meaning it is more meaningful and more good looking rather than the second example. So the second example is she is kind of pretty. So the word kind of, it is used when you are trying to explain or describe something, but you cannot be exact. So the given example, it changes the meaning of the sentence. So it means the sentence will be decreased because she is kind of pretty. It means medyo maganda. Unlike to the unlike to the first given example. Next slide. Okay, so now let's proceed to the last categories, which is how to use qualifiers. Next reporter, please.
Hello. How to use qualifiers? we will be talking about what do we need to do when on how to use qualifiers. First is that, next slide please. What are the do's on how to use qualifiers? First is that use them to clarify your statement. We need to clarify our statement so that we can avoid misunderstanding or to avoid the communication or the sentence might be confusing like that. We need to clarify our statement by saying it again in a new way and adding more details. Next is that use them purposively. We need to use qualifiers purposively to avoid misunderstanding, like what I have said in the first. Third is that use them to avoid generalization. It seems that when someone else makes assumptions or generalization, we hate it. And when we next hear someone else make a generalization, we again forget what the value of the statement. I assert that the value of a generalization is quite simple. People like to state opinions, they like to hear opinions, and they like to use them to inform behavior. They also like to consider opinions and even disagree with them. And if the option and if the opinion is stronger by the way of generalization, the statement will be better. So those are the things we need to do on how we use qualifiers. Next reporter, please.
Okay, wait lang. So before we proceed to the don'ts of using qualifiers, let me add additional information about the three those. So the first one, use them to clarify your um, statement. Why? So it is mostly true. Like for example, in paragraph or when we create a paragraph or sentences, it is 80% true, but still there have a mistake that you inserted in a paragraph or in a sentences. So if you want to clarify a sentence or a paragraph, you need to use qualifier. So to the second one is use them purposively. So this, you need to use it with a purpose and with a reason. But if you use it of no reason, so better don't use it. Why? Because it is important to deliver it when we use qualifier. So we use qualifier to a sentence to serve a purpose or a reason to use it. And last, use them to avoid generalization. So it is also important to avoid generalization to a text to avoid misinterpret or misunderstanding. So, but when we add or use a qualifier, we avoid this kind of misunderstood and judgment of a sentence or in the paragraph. Next, please.
Hello.
Next, please.
So we have learned about the do's and the rules of how qualifiers are used in syntax and discussed by the previous reporters. Now we will be discussing about the don'ts of what not to do when using qualifiers. So okay, so number one, don't use them to replace adjectives or adverbs. What this means is sometimes people would often do like words like this. She's absolutely beautiful, but more often than not, people use this. She is absolutely without adding the verb. They're replacing the verb, the adverb or adjectives with qualifiers, and that's a big red flag when you're using qualifiers. They can't stand on their own. They're not their own sentence, but instead use them to support adjective or adverbs. Diba? As mentioned by our previous reporter, that qualifiers can intensify or can weaken the point that you want to do, that you want to deliver to your listener or the audience. Um, uh, I'll give you another example. Diba? When when you will say Angelica is absolutely beautiful, you can't just say Angelica is absolutely, right? It's a hanging statement. Do you get that? It's a hanging statement. It doesn't make sense. But if you add or you complete it with an adjective or an adverb, it would be complete. Do you know what? Oh, okay, I'll give an example. Angelica is absolutely beautiful, diba? It's a whole sentence. It adds flavor to the description. Okay, so again, don't use qualifiers as a substitute with adjectives and adverbs, because it would not stand on its own. So number two, so don't use them to lengthen your essay or paper. So yeah, it's college. Yeah, it's sometimes we're in high school, or sometimes and now we're in college. We're using this qualifiers or this adjective adverbs just to lengthen the essay, and it is wrong. The reason behind that is because if you add more or you add more qualifiers to the essay, sometimes it would not align to the whole meaning itself. I'll give you an example. When you say Apple is the most beautiful person in the world, and the introduction, sometimes people um, would not parallel that to the one that they wrote in the introduction. You know what I mean? Minsan they would write she's absolutely beautiful, but on the latter part, they would write she's somewhat beautiful, like right? It doesn't align. So um, as mentioned by the previous reporter, use them with a purpose. So now use them by connecting this qualifiers, kasi minsan they don't connect. That's one common mistake of writers. Qualifiers that they use in the introduction would not be connected to the conclusion. So next we have use too many of them. Okay, don't use many qualifiers often. So a tip that I saw a while ago was use them when you're clearing up something, diba? You're clearing up something, or use them when you really need to use them. If you're making a point or you're just making the idea clear, use them. Use these qualifiers stuff to intensify or lessen the point that you want to give. Just use them when you need it to. And that is the don'ts of using qualifiers. So
Thank you for that, Mr. Ram. So basically, the qualifiers have an important role in English language, especially when we are writing or explaining. So remember that when you are writing, use qualifier well, read them well, and understanding better to help everyone, especially as a student. That's all, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your time, guys. So, pwede bang mag-open cam lahat for documentation? Please open your cam, guys. Kuya Ram, pwedeng ikaw na lang mag-take ng pic?
paano ba?
Wait lang, wait lang. Wait.
Screenshot ba? Hindi lang, hindi naka-on lahat eh.
Naka-open na pa lahat? Wait lang. Si Pat ata hindi na makakapag-open.
Paano yung ano? Ayan, together mo. Yeah. Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Sapa, sapa, sapa. 1, 2, 3. Ba't nga, nagtago kayo? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Okay, guys. Thank you. Please stop the recording na. Naka-stop na ba?
Stop nyo na.
Angelica is very beautiful ba?
Wala akong maisip.
Uy. Ano, di ba recorded to?
Ano?
Apple, please pasend kay ano
Oy.
Okay na, sige, sige. Yung ano, kahit pa today, ay tonight,
Uy, paano pala yung sa akin? Di ba nag-post ako kanina?
ano yun, yung ikat na lang ni Kuya